I just received this cute little cutting, and in today's video we're growing this plant from this to this over the course of 12 months. And at the end I'm going to share all of my top tips to grow a nice lush shingling variegated Scindapsus. Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to another plant spotlight. This is Scindapsus Jade Satin Variegata. I believe that's its official name. It's a stunning plant. Now it has actually been quite the journey with this plant. It wasn't smooth sailing. We had fungal issues, pest issues, multiple extensions, some propagation attempts and so on. So we've kind of had it all, which always makes for a really interesting plant spotlight. The attention is not on you for once, huh? They can't see you down there, darling. Okay, you can probably just see Brad's leg coming up here asking for belly scratches. So why don't I go ahead and give Brettles the scratchies that he deserves, and we are taking it back to Jan from 12 months ago who first unboxed this plant. On that note, Jan from the past, present and future would love for you to engage with this content. Engaging with my content is for free for you, but honestly means the world to me and the future of this channel. So give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, leave a comment down below, share this video with your friends and family, watch it as many times as you can. In advance, I really appreciate it, so thank you. But let's keep going with the video. I'm really grumpy today. I'm a little frustrated, but I've got happiness sent in a box to me today. I made a few plant purchases. I think it was actually on my birthday, which is already a couple of weeks ago. Usually I ship out pretty much straight away. It actually worked really well for me because I wasn't home wasn't home much recently. I was in Miami and I was at Kangaroo Valley. So I ordered this 2 weeks ago already and it just arrived today, but it wasn't in the post for 2 weeks. I think it was shipped on Monday and today is Wednesday. So it's only been in the post for a couple of days. But I don't 100% remember what I ordered because I just ordered it was my birthday, so I was like, stuff it, I'm gonna get everything. Of course, as always, it's from Flora Magnifica, where I get all of my teeny tiny tissue culture plants from. So this is Philodendron. This is Scindapsus Jade Satin Aurea Variegata. Cute, huh? Let me bring it a bit closer. I don't know I think it's gonna be too bright, but I really like this half over here. I think this looks kind of cute. And yeah, let's have a look at the roots. Now I've actually done 3 hours of repotting today already, so I'm so over it. So I'm not really planning on doing anything with these plants today. They're just gonna go into the IKEA cabinet. And that is it. I'm gonna look at them when I have a little bit more brain capacity to do so. But I think his name is Dexter, the guy from Flora Magnifica. He sends it with this little slip that shows what he treated it with. He treated it with bifenthrin and imidachloride. I think the imidachloride, that's the one that is the active ingredient in Comfortor/Contender spray. So I know that he's treated them already as part of a plant health assurance certificate. Sorry, I'm not showing you the full thing because it has my details on it. So I have no concerns about pests, and honestly I've been getting plants from him for over a year now and I've never ever had any issues. So I can see one little root here. It's going to be hard for you to see on camera with that harsh light. But yeah, the moss is still moist. So I'm just gonna pop this in my IKEA cabinet, and there is a new leaf unfurling over here. And I think once that leaf has unfurled, I will see, and if I want to pot this up or something like that. Oh, there are some drainage holes in this little cup actually. I was just about to make some, but they're already there, so perfect. I'll park this on the side. No further action required for today. That's it. Hello, long time no see. I believe this might actually be our first update for this plant. And look, not too much has happened, but let me show you. I do believe it only came with one leaf, didn't it? I think it only came with this one. It then grew this one over here and then grew this one. So a significant increase in leaf size, and you can see that the variegation is still quite lime green, and then over time actually fades to a more yellow to then a more cream. So that's very exciting. In the root front you can definitely see some chunky roots going into the moss over here. The moss has a lot of algae, so it's kind of hard to see, but there's definitely roots within that little cup. Now, based on how root bound it is and based on, oh hang on, there's also a new leaf unfurling over here, by the way. Based on the root system and just the fact that it's still in a little takeaway cup, hello baby, I should probably repot this. But with the repot I also want to give it a pole, and my IKEA cabinet is quite busy at the moment. It's quite full, but there are a few plants that need to move out soonish. So I think if I wait another month or so, I'll have more room available in my IKEA cabinet, and then can then give it a pole and keep it in the IKEA cabinet, because I want to give this a larger pole straight away, not the teeny tiny ones I usually give them, because I want this to shingle on it quite nicely. But, plus, based on the increase in leaf size, obviously it likes the conditions in the IKEA cabinet, and the light itself is currently sufficient to actually get this to increase. So let me see what this next leaf looks like, and if it's now going down in size despite the conditions not having changed, then it would probably be a sign that this needs more space, and then I'll give it a moss pop. So basically, long-winded way of saying that I'm gonna do nothing about this plant and hoping that the high light intensity in the IKEA cabinet is giving this plant enough potential to continuously increase in leaf size until I've got a little bit more room in the cabinet to give it a pole. I mean, maybe it could also easily move out of the cabinet, but it's doing so well at the moment. Like, let's not fix what's not broken. I think, yeah, let's do that. I'm not aiming for maturity on this plant anyway. I'm just aiming for a nice consistent shingling, but I would rather have the leaves to be a bit larger when they shingle rather than smaller like this. So, but I don't think I'm gonna get this really, really large anyway, right? Oh well, time will tell. We are back. It has been October, November, December, 3.5 months. It's been 3.5 months since I got this plant, and I think a month since the last update. Root growth is getting out of control. The internodal spacing is increasing. Look at these shorter internodal spacings versus this. So, and the latest leaf was smaller than the one before. So I think it's definitely time to give this plant a pole. And of course I'm not organized and I don't have a pole here. One moment please. Alrighty, here we go. Grow Vertical. I decided to go with one of the Grow Vertical Pros, so not the teeny tiny ones that I normally use, because I want this to sit flat on this pole over here so that it has a nice little display side rather than kind of curling around the pole. Now, for this pole, I will need to give it a 14 centimeter pot that I didn't clean, oopsie, which means that it's quite a significant increase in pot size, but I think it will be just fine. The only consideration, or the only thing I really need to consider today is if I want to give it a full pole straight away, or if I maybe cut the pole in half and re-extend it later. Normally I like to give my plants full poles straight away so that it can just climb up there for the next year or so without me having to interfere. But it is getting quite cramped in my IKEA cabinet and I want to put it back in there. And if I do that, then it might be kind of far away from the light, but so here we go. I'm going to put it on a full pole and I'm going to assess if I can fit it in my IKEA cabinet. Alright, I'm just removing any of the moss over here. It was actually in a moss perlite combination and it's making it much easier to remove that. So that is maybe something I will consider going forward. So, full on concentration. Now I'm trying to remove as much of the moss as possible, but I'm also only while not harming the plant, if that makes sense. There's no point in removing the moss if you then harm the roots to the extent that the roots die anyway, right? The whole idea of removing the moss is to prevent the substrate from being kind of waterlogged. But I'm doing more water retentive mixes these days anyway, and I've adjusted my watering a little bit. I'm kind of a bit lazier with the watering. Back in the days I was more of a helicopter waterer and kind of more leaning towards the oil watering side, hence I used to use a really chunky aeroid mix. But over time I think I'm obviously also just getting better at reading the signs that my plant give me. Alright, now the next thing I want to do over here is I put the pole into the pot to kind of see where it meets, right? So here. So I want to make sure that the moss kind of stops where the pot starts so that I can fill this part with aeroid mix instead. And now this is also going to help me pinning my plant to the pole. Now that's the problem with letting the roots grow too much. Now I will kind of have to fiddle this root in hindsight, which can be hard, but I'm going to give it a shot. The other thing is, see how all of these roots at the bottom are now pushing up against the mesh? I will probably just cut this mesh off so that I can slide this in a little bit nicer. And by probably I mean I'll do it like now. Alrighty, see this, now these roots can kind of breathe down here. Now I just need to make room for this root. It's going to be like here-ish. And I'm just going to try and make a hole into the pole. Like just into the moss part, so that I can actually kind of stick it in there. Oh, there you go. I hope you saw that. I do not want to redo that. Now usually I like to use little clips, but I don't have any at the moment. I'm just going to use a cable tie. That also makes it a little safer, makes it a little bit more permanent. Reason I don't often like to use cable ties for this sort of stuff is because the cable tie doesn't give the plant much room to expand afterwards. But I'm not worried about this stem getting really thick anytime soon and then being strangled by the cable tie. But you know, if I just use a normal pin, and if the stem is getting too big for the pin, the stem is just going to push the pin out of the pole. But I can also just make it fairly loose, you know. So I put the cable tie on here, but I didn't fully tighten the cable tie, so it's not going to strangle the plant. Beautiful. I think that will be okay. The roots will find their own way, hopefully. Alright, now I just pop this in here and top it up with aeroid mix. Now, as I mentioned before, more water retention in my aeroid mix these days. It has a lot more tree fern fiber, which has great water retention, but still great aeration. It's nice and fluffy, so I'm not worried about root rot over here, but definitely adjusting my watering frequency. And I do not want to compress this. I love the fluffiness of the aeroid mix and the tree fern fiber, so I'm just going to shake it instead of actually like really compressing it. However, at the back over here, that's where I can put a little bit more aeroid mix and actually compress it, and that's going to hold the pole in, ideally. Alrighty, now I'm going to go get a pin. So I was just lazy, I'm sure I'll find one somewhere. No pin! Oh my god. Let me steal one from a plant. That's what I mean by pin. Now, I'm not using the pin to make the plant climb up this pole. It's gonna do all of that by itself. I want to use the pin to make sure that the plant grows on that part of the pole that I want it to grow on. Ideally, I want it to be pretty centered so that, you know, the plant can shingle up that pole and kind of cover the entire pole with its nice little shingling pattern. So I'll probably, hopefully the plant will do it by itself, but I will constantly keep an eye on the growth point and just make sure it stays in the middle of the pole, just to kind of manage the aesthetic of the plant. Alrighty, so I do want to acknowledge the beautiful half-halves though, because that is really, really nice, and I'm so glad that it kind of persisted the whole time. Now I'm hoping it's gonna stay that way. Anyway, I'll give this some water and I'll try and fit it in my IKEA cabinet, and it's so squishy in there. I'll just bring you closer with my phone camera. It worked! Alrighty, and we're back. It has been 2 months. Let me bring you a bit closer. So, when I potted it up, the plant was down here. Those were the 2 leaves. So it has grown 3 leaves since then. And I'm very happy to say that it's retaining the half moon. Now, there was definitely a bit of an awkward, lengthy internode at the time of putting it on there. Maybe I should have put it on there a little bit earlier. But all it really did is giving me more nodes to make contact with the moss pole, which I'm not mad about. You can see every node so far. I don't know if you can actually see that on camera. But every node so far has made contact with it. However, I am still using the piece of wire to help it keep it centered. So it really trails up the center. Because the light is actually positioned here. So the plant wants to crawl towards the light, right? So I'm kind of helping it out a bit. But I am super happy with the variegation that is shown and how consistent it is. Not super happy with the speed of growth. I think it's definitely on the slow side of things. But considering the root system is starting to build within the pole, I'm confident that we can see some faster growth going forward. But, you know, as I've been doing this for longer and longer, the less I worry about speed of growth. Honestly, sometimes the slow plant is kind of like a really welcome addition because it also means less work, right? And yeah, ultimately there's not much plant here, but quite a thick moss pole in a pot, so I also don't need to water this all too often. It's in the IKEA cabinet where there's hardly any moisture escaping through the environment, right? It's only if the plant really uses the moisture that's when I need to water. So at this stage, in those 2 months, I probably watered this plant twice. So very low effort at this stage. But honestly, early days. Let's stay patient. Let's see what happens. That's the beauty about plant care, right? You never know. Oh well, that escalated quickly. It's only been a month and 3 weeks. Let's call it a month and a half. And the plant has made significant progress when it comes to leaf growth, which really makes me think I should have just put this on a moss pole much earlier. Because we're already... Yes, baby. Hello. Yes. Do you want to show yourself to the camera? Or just meow? It's already reached the top of the moss pole. It has absolutely shot the lights out. I think it was somewhere here in the last update, and look how beautiful these leaves are. They have this crazy sheen to it as well. The most stunning variegation on every single one. I love how when they first come out, it's not as distinct, and then over time the green gets very green and the variegation almost goes full pristine white. I also still have every single leaf on this plant, but have a look at this over here. The latest node is already not making contact with the substrate anymore, and all of these roots are just sticking out, and I would love for them to grow into a pole instead. So basically time for an extension, and I do that as usual, and I really should have done this probably 2 weeks ago, because now with this newest leaf and another one unfurling, plus all of these roots here, I'm just running risk of potentially ruining the roots and or the new leaf. And by ruining, I mean just slightly bumping into it and then leaving a really ugly mark behind or something like that, right? Everything is possible. Nothing is guaranteed. Okay, I have already prepared a grow vertical over here. Pretty sure that I tried to grow something on it before and it obviously didn't grow. But what I'm doing with these ones, I've recently started filling my grow verticals very densely with a lot of medium. In this instance, I don't think that is needed because there isn't that much plant on the pole, and I want the plant to sit very flat on the pole. So I keep the pole flat as well, but I have added a little bit of extra down here. And I think I say that every time when I do these extensions, you can go on the inside or you can go on the outside. If you go on the inside of the existing pole, you're running risk of potentially ruining some roots. If you go on the outside, you're running risk of potentially causing some watering issues where the watering is where the water's dripping out at the back. But to be honest, I more often go with the outside, and I've never had water drip through them. So I think it's a non-concern in practice, but I understand that in theory that could be a concern. Do whatever you want, just make it stable. Okay. I'm overlapping it by 2, and now I'm gonna cable tie these poles together. You would have seen me do this hundreds of times by now. And when I only put 2 poles together, I do not need to further secure them with a garden stake, because 2 poles is not tall enough that I'm worried about stability. When I bought this plant, I didn't really have much expectations on this plant, and it wasn't really like that exciting initially, but I feel like now that it's growing really well, I am very excited about this plant. And I'm also excited about how little space it takes up. Obviously now a little bit more, but I think it is just such a different way of growing, just being a little bit more shingling, you know, and not having enormous petioles and so on. So I'm actually quite excited to see this plant continuously grow, and I'm excited to see how large the plant can grow. I will probably put another pole on top of that before I actually fundamentally change something about this plant, but I already have a few ideas. Yep, I have a clip here. Perfect. I take a little piece of wire that I turn into a U, and now this newest node that you saw earlier that already had the roots, I want to tell that node to go into the middle of the pole, so I have a nice shingling arrangement right in the middle. I'm making a little hole in the middle of the moss pole for these existing roots to go into, so I'm not squishing them, and now I'm just securing the actual stem with the U-shaped wire, so that these roots that you saw earlier, the fluffy white ones, are now here where my finger is, and they can grow into the pole, and then the plant is back on the middle of this pole. Sweet! Huge plant now. It's going to take up quite a bit of space in the IKEA cabinet. So let me water it and then work on that, and we'll see each other, well, if it keeps growing in this speed, we'll probably see each other really, really soon. Alrighty, and we are back. Look at this. It ended up growing so fast over the last few months, despite us heading into winter. Well, we are in the middle of winter now, but this plant is in the IKEA cabinet, so I suppose the least impacted by the change in conditions. However, now I think, what, I think only 3 months ago I did the extension. The extension is here. So really all of this has just grown in the last 3 months. Like, that's crazy. You can see that these leaves all have a more marbled type of variegation now. Actually, this leaf had no variegation at all. Then came back with a vengeance. These look so gorgeous. And we are now starting to see a decent increase in leaf size. We can also see it is rooting into the moss pole quite desperately. I mean, you can't really see it because all of the nodes are hidden by the leaves here. So a really nice root growth, but the newest node over here has nothing to attach to, so we need to do an extension. Now, with these grow vertical poles, I go up to 3 poles with the extensions before they end up getting a little bit too unstable, heavy and so on. But first of all, that wouldn't fit in my IKEA cabinet. Right now this plant is in my IKEA cabinet, and to be honest I have no desire in changing that, because it's the perfect plant for an IKEA cabinet because it doesn't go forward. One of the lights in my cabinet comes from the front, so if I have a plant that has really long petioles with long leaves, they usually just end up getting burned because they get too close to the grow light. So this is actually the perfect candidate for my grow light, for my IKEA cabinet. But I wouldn't be able to fit it in if I extend it now. Then something else happened, and I suppose it's a sign. When I came back from my holiday, I noticed that these 2 leaves over here have a distinct fungal issue. Actually, this leaf I just stuck in there for the sake of the video. Yeah, as you can see, this leaf is saying goodbye. When I came back, it just had one little dot on this leaf. Same on this one. Let me just rip it off. One little dot, and then over the course of the last 2 weeks this has really expanded. You can see how see-through it is. So this is definitely a fungal issue, and that fungal is going to spread. So this actually fell off by itself. This one I snipped off. Not a bad idea to have this sort of fungal gone, because you don't want that to touch another leaf and then potentially transfer. Now, why did this happen? I reckon what happened is somewhere in the cabinet another plant was dripping water onto those 2 leaves, or another leaf was touching it and there was guttation that basically just caused water to sit on this leaf without it evaporating. And then it was probably a little bit colder because while I'm not here, we're not heating the house as much, and then cold and wet is not a good combination, really encourages fungal. So I think that's what happened, but ultimately I wasn't here. So I just know this is what it looks like and I know where it is, and then I just come to somewhat of a logical conclusion, hopefully. Anyway, now that means that we have this empty bit down here, which kind of works out because this is where the extension meets anyway. So this part is going to be within the new pot. So basically we're doing a chop and extend instead of just an extension. Okay, so the poles overlap by 2 cable ties over here. So the pole will start here. So I will chop here. So that's the node where this first leaf came from, and then this is the node where the second leaf came from that fell off. So I'm going to do the chop right here, and now I'm also going to chop off the cable ties that hold it together. And now let's have a look. Alrighty, there's a few roots down here that I managed to free up. Alrighty, happy days. I'm gonna park this on the side to let this dry out a little bit, just specifically this cut over here, before we work on this part of the pole, which means we can work on this part of the pole for now. I have no desire in extending this as well, because then I'll just end up with 2 plants that are the same. This plant isn't really going to mature much. You don't even want it to mature that much. I want the leaves to just be larger, like I showed you on the earlier pole, so that it really just covers the pole in itself. I don't want them to be huge. But it would look cute if you have a lot of them, right? Specifically with the variegation, it's always interesting to have multiple plants on a pole because each plant would show different variegation, so it just creates a little more interest. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm just going to chop between every single node, and what I do is I don't just chop, I kind of chop like a little gap. So I take a little piece of the stem. I take a little piece of the stem out. So see here, there's like a little gap now. That means that the stem isn't touching, which gives it a quicker chance to dry out and colors over to prevent rot. And I'll do this between every single node. Now, if a node has not thoroughly attached to the pole, it will now kind of spin around, so we'll find out, but I think they're all thoroughly attached, so I don't think I need to protect them any further, if you know what I mean. Also, there's no petiole to kind of make it like heavy. But obviously with every cut, I'm creating a new plant, and I'm also creating an opportunity for different types of variegation to show. Alrighty, now this will go up into my attic, into the rescue section, I think. Either the attic or it will go on in my office. Somewhere somewhat hidden, not because it's not pretty, just because I don't have that much space. Actually, it's so pretty, I should put it on display more. Ideally, I would like to let that thingy colors over for a little bit longer. But I also want to move on. So we're just gonna pot it up straight away. I mean, it is a pretty skinny stem in the first place, so it should just be fine. Let me quickly put back the 2 cable ties that I've removed down here, just to give the bottom part a little bit more stability and make sure that the mesh and plastic backing are one unit. And I usually like to remove a little bit of moss from the bottom because moss has high water retention. But that's okay, I'm not gonna do that in this instance. And see how this one leaf is now kind of a little bit too low, but it's not too bad. I'm just gonna push this over to the side so it's not in the pot. But these 2 leaves that had fungal issues would have been in the pot anyway, so I would have had to remove them anyway. So I don't know, I still don't know exactly what caused it, but I feel like whatever caused it knew what I had in mind. It honestly happened in the perfect spot. It was literally the best spot it could have happened to, so I'm not even mad. could be a blessing in disguise in the long run. I also put a little bit of airwood mix at the back and I compressed that just to give it stability, but there's not going to be any roots in the back of the pole, right? So not much. The bulk of the media is going to be added to the front. Beauty. Now, stability is not really a concern because I'm hanging it in the IKEA cabinet anyway, but still, I want to at least pretend like IKEA. But still, you know, we can try a little bit. Alrighty, here we are. Now we need to extend this without hurting this top leaf over there. I fill up that little top bit with moss, and here's the extension. I leave the bottom part of the moss usually empty because I'm not too sure if I use it as an extension or if I pot it up outright. So I fill this up as well. You can slide it on the inside or the outside, whichever you desire. We're overlapping by 2 and then cable tie through the plastic, mesh. First one is the hardest. Again, stability is not going to be too much of an issue, so this tiny pot with this thick pole is just fine. Alright, here we go. The plant has plenty of room to grow. Now, last time it only took about 3 months for the plant to grow almost a full pole. I would expect it to slow down. First of all, because we are in the middle of winter, but second of all, last time I just gave it an extension. The plant could just grow as if nothing happened. It didn't know that there was no extension there beforehand. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't mess with the plant. It was very unintrusive. Whereas this time around, I halved the plant. I cut off all of the bottom root system from the top part of the pole. So chances are that this plant is going to spend a little bit more time re-establishing a root system first, and or that it has a smaller root system to now facilitate less growth or slower growth or smaller growth or something like that. But ultimately, due to the root system already established in the pole itself, all of that shock should have been at least mitigated, but probably not completely eliminated. But you know what? I can speculate as much as I want. Why don't we just check in with Jan from the future to see what actually happened? Here you can see the aphids. See all of these little dots. I think that was all aphids. See this deformation? That was aphids. But beautiful variegation on this plant. So nice. And I've got a full plant spotlight on this plant coming soon as well. Here's the bottom part of the... Oh my god, look at the aphids on here. Oh my goodness. That's the bottom part of, of the nice Scindapsus that I showed you downstairs. Oh yeah, bum scratchies, huh? Spankies? Oh yeah. Hey, don't mess with my couch. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Fully forgot you were here. We had good scratchies, huh? We had some good cuddles. But we need to share the spotlight with my Jade Scindapsus for a little bit. Alrighty, here we are. Let me bring you a little bit closer so I can show you what happened. So since I potted it up, let's start at the bottom. Since I potted it up, to be honest, I can't really see much root growth in the pot. There's like a few over here, but nothing really fundamental. So really the majority of the root system must be within the moss pole. I've also noticed these fungal issues continuing down here, which I'm not happy with. But I've kind of decided to absolutely nothing about it because I'm hoping that now that we are in spring, that it's just naturally kind of gonna calm down because we don't have cold and wet anymore. We kind of have warm and dry now. But we can see blah blah blah, all good over here. I think the extension is somewhat here. So I think in the last video this was that last leaf that was unfurling before I put the extension on. Now you can see that thereafter all of these leaves are a little bit deformed. See all of this crinkling over here, over here, over here. You can even see distinct little dots. This one was very deformed. You can really see this side being challenged, and then from here we're going back to normal. And then by normal I mean the most beautiful leaves ever. They're significantly larger. They're retaining the beautiful half moon, but also have marble on the other side. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. You get marble variegation and half moon variegation in each leaf. Now this newest node is slightly coming off the center, so I'm going to continuously pin this to here. And that is really something I maintained throughout the whole process. I continuously moved that pin up to make sure that that newest node is always attaching to the center of the pole. Now towards the second half of the year that got a little bit easier because I previously had it in the corner of my cabinet with light coming from here, whereas towards the end I actually had it in the middle of my cabinet with light coming from the front. So with the light coming from the front, the plant naturally wants to be a little bit more centered on the pole. But I just used that same clip, right? So I don't have a clip in each node now because once the plant attaches using the roots, I don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to do that, of course. You can also just let it grow wild, but I just love this really neat display, and this from here upwards is really what I'm aiming for. I really want these leaves to be large enough so that they're almost overlapping each other a little bit, but specifically they're overlapping the pole, right? So down here you can obviously still see quite a bit of pole. Up here you can see less and less of moss pole. Now I'm actually really positively surprised at how it reacted post chop and extend. It grew pretty fast, right? I think if I remember it's still only like two and a half months I think since the chop and extend. And those 2.5 months were the worst 2.5 months when it comes to the conditions. Of course, given that it's in the IKEA cabinet, it isn't exposed to the harshest part of winter as much as the plants outside of the IKEA cabinet would be, for example. But I noticed with other plants in my IKEA cabinet that they definitely slowed down during winter. This one pretty much did not skip a beat. So despite the conditions and also despite the chop and extend, right? It was just relying on the roots within this moss pole over here to continuously grow, and it didn't just continuously grow, it actually started maturing pretty quickly after the chop. And a further challenge that this plant was set is this part over here. All these crinkly leaves that I showed you, and I suppose you already know why they're crinkly based on that short little clip I inserted beforehand. That was thrips. So pretty much all of July and aphids. I think aphid, maybe both. Definitely aphids. Sorry, I had thrips and aphids both in my IKEA cabinet and in my rescue section where this plant was. So could have been a combination of both, but I do believe aphids. Anyway, basically over the month of July and August I had a lot of aphids on this plant in here, as well as the little propagation that I put in my rescue section that we look at in a sec. And you can really see where these aphids kind of set and they started sucking the life force out of these leaves. They suck on these leaves as the leaf is unfurling, and that's what then causes this deformation. The leaf can't unfurl normally anymore because the aphid is destroying it in the process. So that's why it gets so crinkly and not so super pretty anymore. I treated it with contender spray a couple of times, and then eventually I gotten on top of it. But I mean, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves that were impacted by it. Now it is growing leaves pretty quickly. That's definitely like a month's worth of leaves, I'd say, where I struggled with the aphid infestation. That obviously would harm the plant further or take energy away from the plant. So the plant matured and continuously grew quite fast despite the chop, the conditions and pest issues. So it's a pretty resilient plant from what I've noticed. Now down here we do have this fungal again, as I mentioned before, but again I'm not really concerned, especially if it just happens down here. I could chop these 2 leaves off, but I'm also not worried for it to spread from here to the top, right? I think this plant grows so fast that naturally I'll chop off bottom parts quite frequently anyway, because I think I just want to keep it as this 2-pole scenario. Maybe I'll change my mind and I add a 3rd pole and I put it outside of the IKEA cabinet now that we are back in spring and summer and I can give this plant good conditions anywhere. But I kind of really like having this compact display, and as I mentioned in one of the updates as well, it just works perfectly fine with my IKEA cabinet because it is so compact, doesn't have these long petioles. I don't care about this sort of leaf damage because the plant will just outgrow its support so frequently that I don't really have to worry about keeping existing leaves pristine for all too long. Alrighty, so that was kind of all of the, you know, exciting things that happened as part of this journey. The less exciting things are basically stock standard process over here. It's in my aeroid mix, not that this pot down here has really much to say. Actually, that makes me think. I think with the next chop and extend, I might just take the bottom part, I'll remove the pot and I'll just hang it on my fence outside without a pot. I think it will look good. I might give some to Tim for his fence as well. Yeah, that would look so stunning. I have this new dark grey fence. I think this would be such a fantastic pop of color on that fence. Anyway, I digress. Teeny tiny bit of aeroid mix, obviously almost negligent. Really, the plant mainly grows in moss. The moss has really good water retention, and especially in a high humidity environment like the IKEA cabinet that stays around 90 to 95% humidity year round. I very, very rarely had to water this plant. I would say probably maximum twice a month I water this plant, and I don't even water it thoroughly. I literally just take a little bit of water and I pour it up here, and because it's in the IKEA cabinet in like a little saucer, I can actually see when I overwatered or watered too much, and then I can just empty the saucer at the bottom, right? So super low effort, because obviously also the plant doesn't have that many leaves, or the leaves aren't that big. If you compare that to my cupria over there, for example, right? Like if I take all of these leaves and I would stitch them together, they probably have the same surface area as one of the cupria leaves. If the plant has small leaves, it doesn't need that much water. It's in a high humidity environment, not much water is evaporating and so on. So very, very easy going, in my opinion, but obviously the IKEA cabinet would have helped. I have not had the experience of this drying out completely and how the plant would respond to that, but that basically means that I've never let it dry out, and thus that's also my recommendation. If you can avoid this pulp from drying out, I think your plant will have the best time. Whether or not the plant could tolerate the pole drying out a little bit, I can't really say, but usually Scindapsus are fairly resilient, but given that it is so variegated, specifically having the fully white halves, I don't think letting this plant dry out is a really smart decision. Now, because I don't water it all too often, I also didn't provide that many nutrients. I provide nutrients with every watering, so if my plant gets watered every week, then it gets nutrients every week. If it gets watered every 2 weeks, then I suppose it gets nutrients every 2 weeks. So I don't increase the dilution as a result of it, because I just pre-mix the water and walk around and use the same water for all of my plants. I do have too many plants to give each plant a different dilution of nutrients. So I just use my stock standard 3 to 5 milliliters per liter of water of Foliage Focus. It was just applied less frequently due to less frequent watering, but obviously the plant does not look nutrient deficient whatsoever, so that's good. And pest treatment via contender spray as always. So overall, I think it was a really easy journey, but there's obviously things that I could have improved on. I think I could have definitely improved on giving this plant a pole earlier. The first 3.5 months, not much has happened. That's kind of a lie. It actually built a decent root system, and I suppose maybe that root system helped then push out lots of growth once I did give it a pole. But I reckon if I would have had space in the IKEA cabinet at the time of first purchasing this plant, I could have put this on a moss pot pretty much immediately, and I would have probably had much faster results. It would have probably saved a good 2 months or so, because it hardly grew in the first 3.5 months, despite the fact that those 3.5 months were actually the best months of the year. Once I gave it a pole, it significantly started increasing in speed. And that is not just because of the pole in itself or the moss in itself. It's just because that's how the plant wants to grow. I think once it's signalized to the plant that, hey, we've got a host to attach to in shingle, that is how the plant wants to grow. That's how the plant grows in nature. So that is basically giving the plant the go ahead to absolutely shoot the lights out. Especially with a shingling plant like that, I don't think you really need to establish a big root system for the pot, right? You could literally just take a node, pin it to the pole with 1 or 2 roots and get them attached, and then let it start growing up the pole. So in hindsight, I should have really given it a pole like even that day when I first unboxed it, or like a week after or so. But growing plants is a marathon, not a sprint. So having a little delay by 2 or 3 months, obviously doesn't make a difference. It just means I would have had to go through one more chop and extend, which means I have another bottom part and so on. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. These days I have so many plants, it's not just about optimizing each plant's growth and speed of growth, it's really about optimizing the whole lot as a collection, right? So if I make room for this plant and another plant suffers as a result of it, then I might not optimize the collection, right? So you gotta, obviously in these plant spotlights, I show you one plant in isolation, but in reality, it is just one of hundreds of plants that I'm currently growing, and with so many plants comes the need for prioritizing. But now that it is so pretty, I'm more than happy to prioritize it. Now also what you can see with that speed of growth, this leaf has hardly unfurled yet, right? Or like I think it just unfurled yesterday. It still has a lot of inflating to do. It's going to be bigger than these ones, and it's already starting to unfurl the next one. So it's super, super rapid at the moment. So really, really happy. I feel like this leaf might be fully variegated. See, there's just a little bit of green at the very base over here. But we'll find out. I think this is really the standout part for me with this plant, besides the beautiful shingling nature of it, is not just the variety and the amount of variegation that it has, but how interesting the variegation performs within each leaf, right? It unfurls and it's kind of green on green, you can hardly see it. Then it gets a little bit more visible by the dark parts getting darker, the light parts getting lighter, all the way to it being like green and yellow, then green and cream, and it almost went green on white towards the bottom. I'll show you the bottom part. Let's just do that before we wrap it up. So that I think is stunning, and it's not something I often observe with variegated plants. Bottom part, you remember I chopped that up quite significantly. Now this also then had significant aphid damage, so that would have obviously very much impacted the way that this plant can recover and regrow. And you definitely see this is a node, for example, that kind of died and the leaf just fell off. That's okay. Down here you can also see lots of leaves. They're obviously also just old by now, right? But I think aphids wouldn't have helped. But over here you can really see, I think this is obviously also fungal related, but I do believe that these white parts are suffering if I let the pole dry out too much. Much hotter upstairs in my rescue section. So this pole up there has dried out more frequently than the pole in the IKEA cabinet. Hence, I think I'm experiencing more damage on these leaves. That doesn't matter because I'm not after the old leaves, they're just a means to an end. They're just there to hopefully establish multiple new plants, and that's what we have done. We have one shoot over here that was unfortunately aborted due to aphids, but maybe it'll come back. We've got a shoot over here that's pushing out its first leaf, which also looks a little bit manky. Again, we can blame the aphids on that. We then have a leaf unfurling here from this cutting. We have a leaf unfurling, or a second leaf unfurling over here from a cutting. Again, this one you can see it had a bit of deformation from aphids, but that's okay, we tackled them now. Another leaf unfurling here, and another second leaf unfurling over here already, with this one not showing aphid damage. So that's good. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Definitely 5, and then there's actually another aborted one here. So we had 7, but out of those 7, 5 are actually growing leaves now, because I think the other 2 were too impacted by aphid damage. Obviously doesn't look like much right now, but just the fact that I've currently got 5 leaves unfurling on this pole, in addition to having this entire plant, and it all came from that little 1.5 leaf cutting I got 12 months ago, I think this is a crazy good result. And think about it, there'll be 5 leaves growing on here now, and if they unfurl a leaf a week, or even a leaf every 2 weeks, because that's how fast it can grow once it's established. Let's say a leaf every 2 weeks. That means I'll have 10 leaves within a month, 20 within 2 months, and so on, right? So it can get lush really, really quickly. And then I might take some of those and pop in my garden, shingle up my fence, pop some in Timmy's garden and so on. So despite the fact that I've created a beautiful specimen for myself that I'm going to have, I've also created lots of potential to share this beautiful plant with my friends. Now it's still too early to see the proper variegation of these offshoots and to see whether it continues with the nice half-half or not. But from what I've experienced, even after a fully green leaf, it came back, and it's very varied. So of course it's not stable because you can see how much it changes throughout, but it seems to be somewhat stable in the sense that it doesn't completely lose it, right? It just comes back with a different variety. The more I look at this plant, the more stunning this plant looks. I'm just actually so excited. It's been a long time that I was that excited about a plant, and this plant was really just a bit of a filler when I made that purchase on my birthday last year. I just wanted to buy things. I had a desire to buy some plants. This one was inexpensive, was never on my wish list. I had no expectations, and it far exceeded my expectations. And I think that's a good learning for myself, because I often don't give plants a chance. I feel like I have so many plants now that I'm usually super picky with what I add to my collection or not. And it's a plant that was never really on my radar. And I don't know what possessed me to actually end up purchasing this, but I'm so glad I did. Hopefully this encourages me to try that again with other plants that I might feel a little bit apprehensive with at first. I think it's time for me to wrap it up. I'm just so excited about this plant. Sorry, I can hardly shut up about it because it's been a while that I actually had great success with the plant and that a plant excited me that much. So I'm really happy, and hopefully this video is encouraging you to maybe also pick up one of those or any other shingling plant. I think they are super underrated, and I'm definitely determined to grow a few more of them. In the comments down below, let me know, how do you feel about Scindapsus? Do you let them trail? Do you let them climb? What do you do with them? Would you add this plant to your collection? Yes or no? Also make sure you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell icon if you haven't already, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye!